Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the All Words Are Free podcast. So this week, we're going to be talking about philosophy and psychology. This links to my piece recently titled Floating Above My Body, kind of thematically very similar. The quote for this week's episode is, "I think, therefore I am." Okay, so before we begin, I'm going to do our outfit of the day. I will attach a photo. So today's outfit, I'm wearing all my jewellery as usual and like a white sort of like lacy top situation. Had to go sleeveless because I thought it was the summer and then it was freezing outside. And then like a long sort of like denim skirt. The most exciting thing about today's episode is that I have a special guest.
Hello.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Wren, and I'm one of Lily's housemates.
Do you want to do an outfit?
Oh yeah, do you want my outfit?
Yes.
What am I wearing today? I'm wearing one of my favourite shirts, it's colourful. It's like purple and blue and green. And my mum got it for me a while ago because she saw it and it made her think of my hair. Because at the time, my hair was some very interesting colours. But it's very fun and soft, which is the main thing. And I've got socks that have pigs on them. And I'm wearing black trousers.
We love a funky sock.
Yeah.
I love a funky sock. I can always trust you for funky socks.
Yeah, I have a good collection of socks, what can I say? I think I have over 100 pairs of socks.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem.
No, we like it. It's right, you need to set them out in like a little array. Like a little, I was going to say pentagram, but definitely not.
Definitely not a pentagram. A sock mosaic, perhaps.
Your shirt still goes with your hair, though.
It does, yeah, because it's gone back to, not the whole head this time, but the same colours. Full circle.
Okay, so we're going to leap straight in. I've got a few questions written down, because we had a good chat in the cafe the other day. And we just have good chats anyway.
Well, yes.
It's like sitting around the table for like 2 and a bit hours.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so this episode is about philosophy and psychology and how they intertwine. And Wren is here because that is what they studied.
Just finished.
So what drew you to the subject?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, I kind of didn't initially apply for it. So I initially applied for maths and philosophy, which I then realised was not a good idea. So I partly was drawn to the subject as an alternative to maths, but I've also had an interest in psychology for a long time as well and ended up loving my degree, so that was good. But I think I was drawn to philosophy because I think a lot about things and I thought it would be fun to do some thinking and to ask some fun questions. I like to question things, I guess. And then psychology, I think I'm just really interested in how people work. That sounds a very odd way of phrasing it, but
no, that's precisely.
I'm interested in people and understanding people and also helping people, and I feel like it goes together quite well in that way. And I think the combination of psychology and philosophy is a really good combination because I think philosophy is really important for asking questions about how we approach science. And I think it also complements psychology by, I think, recognising that there's some stuff that science can't answer or that can't be answered in general, but offering ways of thinking about things or ways of asking questions.
That's a very good answer. That was really good. Was it, because you said you were drawn to philosophy, was it what you expected?
I would say probably not.
No.
I think like my exposure to philosophy before uni was mostly just like from like a literature point of view.
Yes.
So like I did English A-level and enjoyed the kind of quote marks philosophical discussions about stuff. And so I thought that was sort of what philosophy was. So I guess I had been exposed to it in kind of applying philosophy to other things, which I think I still very much like, and I like that about philosophy. But yeah, coming to uni, I didn't realise how, I guess, rigorous philosophy was as like a kind of, you know, it definitely is creative in terms of you have to think creatively, and it does allow for, you know, artistry and how you write about it or discuss it, but it is also very, well, particularly the philosophy that you study at Oxford is very analytic focused, so very logical. I mean, we studied logic in first year, which was which I enjoyed.
One of the
modules. I enjoyed doing logic because it was kind of fun, which maybe is a weird, some people might think is a weird thing to say.
No, it sounds fun to me.
Yeah, it's like, but yeah, basically, long and short of it, not what I expected, but very interesting.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because I feel like my interest in philosophy is very similar in the way that I like philosophical thought and like conversations and things, and applying it to, say, a novel for English literature, because I did English literature A level as well. But as a subject in itself, it sounds quite, like you said, like rigorous, very inflexible, or because philosophy is would you say it's quite subjective? And so in that way, if you're learning the theories of other people, is it not tailoring your interpretations, and is it not like biasing your interpretations?
In a way, yeah, I think, like if you're sort of reading certain people and they're very confidently saying what they think and also what they think philosophy is, which is a contentious subject anyway, but you know, that's not got a clear answer, but yeah, you can definitely be influenced to sort of just agree with them based on how they present it. And which is interesting to think about the sort of implications of that, because for a lot of the kind of questions that you ask in philosophy, there are no answers, or you can't get to an answer. You can only get to a bunch of potential answers, which different people can argue for.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can then find loopholes in those arguments and decide to throw them out. But there's not necessarily a definitive way of affirming the answer.
Yes.
Which, to be fair though, is kind of true with sciences as well, but is often not acknowledged in science, that there isn't necessarily, well, then this is going into philosophy, but yeah, saying there isn't a truth, or there isn't one truth, or we can't discover the world as it is in itself, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like there's no one distinct answer, there's always multiple.
Yeah.
Because by its very nature, philosophy is human thought, and not everyone thinks the same.
Yeah.
And everyone experiences and literally sees the world differently, so it's those sorts of multiple things can be true at once.
Yes, and you can't escape from perspectives.
No.
You can't escape from seeing things through a perspective, and you shouldn't really try to, because that is the way we see the world, is through perspectives, and they can add a lot to it as well. So the kind of idea of objectivity is kind of a bit of an unachievable kind of ideal that maybe you don't even want to be an ideal in some ways.
Yeah.
Obviously it has its place, but yeah.
You don't want everyone to think homogeneously necessarily.
Yeah,
because then you're never going to get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. But I mean, because philosophy is so sort of like, say, versatile in that way, does that make it difficult to study? So many different points of view, and it's all very dependent on the person. Say, for example, when you're writing an essay and somebody's marking it, how is that? I mean, obviously you can't necessarily, how is their marking not influenced by their own perspective, but is there, say, have they taught you a particular way to do essays, and therefore is that kind of curbing your own thoughts in a way, or do you think it works as even a subject of study? Yeah,
I think it's, obviously I can only speak from having studied philosophy at one specific university.
Yes, of course.
And some specific tutors, and maybe other tutors at the same uni teach it differently, and at different unis in different places. Yeah. So obviously I'm just speaking from my particular experience of studying it. I think they make very clear in like the marking criteria for the essays that it's not necessarily about what you say, but how you say it.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can definitely disagree with what the person who's marking it is saying and get a high mark. But it's definitely, you're taught to argue in a specific way, which I think it's valuable to learn to argue in that way. Like, I think I've learned skills and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, there's also definitely different ways of approaching ideas that aren't captured by that. And so, I think like the kind of analytical way of arguing something is useful and has its place, but then also so do other forms of or forms of presenting ideas, or
it has more of a conversational style. So
phenomenological approach.
Phenomenological.
I will briefly sort of try and summarize what it is without going into A, too much detail, and B, hopefully not getting it wrong, because I don't think I fully understand it, as with most stuff in philosophy. But it's kind of the more associated with more continental philosophers. So there's sort of one way of delineating different styles of philosophy is kind of analytic philosophers and continental philosophers.
Right.
And so continental philosophers often refers to people like Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, potentially Nietzsche. I think at Oxford, it's most of the degree is very much focused on analytic philosophy, which is the kind of what I've been talking about, like the kind of rigorous argumentation and sorts of logical proofs and that kind of thing. Whereas, I mean, continental philosophy is not really a homogeneous label to describe things, but as part of that, where I was going, phenomenology, which is essentially trying to get at knowledge or get at ideas through like a sort of description-based approach to, based on the principle that the world is revealed to us through how it appears to us, and that you kind of don't really go beyond that. Things are revealed to you through descriptions rather than arguments, and it's revealed to you kind of in your response to those descriptions, and like so it's a lot like it's feelings focused.
It makes
and,
that makes sense.
So there's certain like feelings that you experience which tell you stuff about the world, and you can't necessarily put those feelings into words either. So you might try and describe a situation in which that feeling sort of arises, or that kind of thing. But where I was going with that was there are lots of different ways of doing philosophy, which some people will like sniff on certain things and be like, that's not proper philosophy. But there's not, I mean, people argue about what philosophy is. So, yeah.
What is philosophy then? But no, it's interesting to hear, like, because I, like, as a complete layman, but like as a majorative layman, the whole analytical thing, it's like interesting to sort of hear about the differences. Because I suppose, say something that's more argument based is more persuasion based, whereas the continental stuff more based on your own personal experience. Yeah, I think in a way, like, definitely. Because and like I said, but I was sort of saying about continental stuff, it's not an umbrella term, and I've only studied like a couple of philosophers within that kind of thing, so I can't speak for what all of them were doing, but like all of the lads in continental,
all the lads in continental philosophy. But I think there is much more of an emphasis on like sort of presenting things and encouraging people to respond to it in their own way, or sort of encouraging people to think.
I see.
It's sort of, I mean, one kind of characteristic of at least some continental philosophers is about sort of focusing on it's a less of a focus on, defining things and more of a focus on allowing people to define them for themselves in a way. That's a very sort of...
No, that's precisely, yeah.
Mm.
No, that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
No. It'd be interesting to see, because I wonder when these philosophers, when the sort of big names in philosophy, whether they, if they saw their classification, because I don't know whether they were classified at the time or whether it's like a later classification, because obviously they're all at different time periods.
Yeah.
But whether they would agree with that. It's interesting. Can you, if philosophy is such a uncementable thing, it's like it's a bit of a tricky solid per se.
Yeah.
It's a bit amorphous, so it's like, can you really categorize things so distinctly?
No.
Yeah.
You can't. I think a lot of them would probably reject a label, because a lot of them reject labels, to be fair.
Wow.
And saying you can't capture it in a neat definition on that kind of thing.
It's abstract thought, right? So.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I've got like a lighter question and then a continuing depth question.
Yeah.
So your choice.
Just do the light one.
Surface level.
Yeah.
Well, I say light. It's more surface level. It's less existential.
Okay.
Linking to our conversation in the coffee shop about modules with like stuff, because obviously philosophy's quite like it can be quite heavy.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, obviously having like something like psychology, it's like it's nice to have something paired with it, because I feel that maybe on its own it'd be a bit
Yeah.
But obviously you can choose modules and stuff. So do you think there's space for some modules to have like warnings or something just attached to them to say like, look, can be very, because philosophies can be very think deeply about things, and
I think sort of to give the context of that conversation we were having in the coffee shop was, so I had just finished finals and had spent the last few months very intensely revising philosophy, and having not sort of thought about it that intensely for most of my degree before that, because I was always sort of doing other things and doing other work, and just like I didn't have the sort of time or sort of space to think about it that deeply. But then in revision I was like, okay, I need to actually like understand these things, so I need to go on a bit of a deep dive. And it was quite intense, so that was where that came from. But
more like perhaps the combinations should be, or if somebody submits, I don't know how this works, but like submits a particular combination, and then somebody might say, well, just maybe because it's subjective as well, isn't it?
So I think, well, there are certain like modules which debatable whether people think they should have warnings, but it would be useful to maybe look at the topics that it involves, which I do think they have available. But for example, something like practical ethics, where you can discuss quite a lot of, I didn't take practical ethics, but you can discuss quite a lot of, very heavy stuff on a kind of real world sort of heavy stuff level. For example, abortion, disability, that kind of thing. But I think with the modules I was taking, one of the things I was sort of thinking about and trying to articulate to Lily, I think, was the kind of how we exist in life we have illusions to help us get through life. And it's up for debate whether these things are illusions or not, but I at least feel like we have a lot of things that we sort of take, assumptions that we use to guide us through lives. Help us to be vaguely content, or at least to have certain faith in how things work. And if you start to question those things too deeply and try and maybe shake those assumptions, which can certainly, you know, have its benefits. There are things that need to be questioned, but yeah, it can leave reality feeling quite fragile if you doubt everything or try and disprove everything, or that's not even necessarily the aim of what it's doing, but you can shift your view on reality, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be quite unsettling. And yeah, the question is whether that's something that can be warned against or should be warned against. I don't know if there is a way to like warn about it. I think just maybe in the way it's taught to help people to
It's difficult,
do
isn't
it.
it?
Yeah.
Because these are things that are worthwhile talking about. I mean, especially, you know, like the examples you gave before, they have very world applications. There, obviously, there's a lot of contention about, say, the topics of abortion, euthanasia. And it's very important to talk about these things on a philosophical and then, like, say, the political or social level. You couldn't axe things like that because obviously, like I say, you need that debate there. Yeah, it's a tricky one because putting warnings on isn't necessarily, because ultimately somebody may be studying it and it's only when they are doing it that I don't know.
Yeah, and I think different people respond differently to different things as well. So, and it's also about how much you throw yourself into it. And I think also, yeah, just the nature of how I was having maybe not done as much work as I could have done earlier on in my degree. I was very much in the, okay, I've got a lot to do now. And so I was doing it quite intense philosophizing, which I think maybe can be, I think philosophizing,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you need to have some grounding in reality, and whether that's something that can be advised by, I don't know, lecturers, tutors, introduction to the subject is when you're studying philosophy, you're going to question a lot of things. So it's always important to also bring things back and, you know, hold on to reality a little bit.
So do you think psychology kind of was the, I don't want to say lighter side because lighter side isn't the right word, but like, do you think having that pairing helped to maybe negate some of that, or if anything, it was just nice to have the variation?
Yeah, I think both. Like it was nice to have the variation just because it's not all philosophy, and also I love psychology, so it was really interesting. But I think, yeah, also having that more grounded in the sense that it was very, like, you could tangibly see the real world applications of it. And yeah, it's very based in the real world, and it can also help you to sort of like channel the philosophy into a real world kind of thing, in the sense that you can see why you're asking the questions that you're asking.
Yeah.
Because I think with philosophy there is the danger, I don't know if danger is the right word, but well, it depends if you think it's dangerous or not. But the danger of just continuing just asking questions and asking so many questions without kind of focus to those. This isn't, I don't mean...
Like there's like an endless all of questions and more questions, and you feel kind of disillusioned with yourself and the world, and it can, you know, you start to question everything. Yeah, and you can fall down the rabbit hole of being like, life's meaningless, is anything real, etc., which maybe life is meaningless and maybe nothing is real. I don't know, but like, I'm gonna enjoy it while I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. And if everything is an illusion, or all of our assumptions are wrong, well, they're mostly working, so I'll just keep going.
Functional false assumptions.
Exactly, yeah. Functional false assumptions can be very useful.
Because that's a funny thing about science, like obviously linking to psychology, and then me with biochemistry. It's like we have evidence for stuff. We have like actual studies and experiments that tell us like the way this works, or these are the way neurons fire, or whatever. But I find it interesting to think about science in the way that, and maths in a similar way, that humans have come up with all the base level stuff that has then led to the next level, the next level, the next level.
Yeah.
And so I find it interesting whether there's a certain like confirmational bias sitting in there somewhere. You can't deny what an experiment shows you, but ultimately we've come up with the whole system of 1 + 1 = 2, which builds to the rest of mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
In the same that like this chemical looks like this. It's like, well, why? Does it really look like that, or is that just a law we've put in that then is built to everything else? I'm not questioning chemistry or biology or whatever it is, and it functions, and it's given us fantastic, you know, advances in medicine and everything and all the such. But from, I guess, a more of a philosophical lens, it's interesting to think about that sort of, it's the human mind and human like need to have certainty.
Yeah.
That has sort of got all these things to where they are in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a kind of search for truth, like you were saying.
Precisely.
Sort of rests on the assumption that there is a truth. And also, yeah, the whole sort of scientific method is built by humans and is used as the kind of, if you're following this method, that's truth in a way, or this is the answer.
Yeah.
But there might be other methods that give you different truths or different answers, and it's all kind of depends on your conceptual framework for looking at things. And so it's, you know, certain frameworks might be useful for certain settings and not appropriate for others. Like science can't tell you everything.
Yeah.
But it can tell you a lot of useful stuff, regardless of whether it's true or not, or whether truth exists, or I don't know if it does or what it is, but yeah, like science is functional, so that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when you think about, say like truth exists and all stuff. It's hard to pin it down, but I think obviously it depends what level you go to. On the surface level, it does exist, of course. Like it's true that I'm speaking to you right now.
Yeah.
On that sort of upper tier sort of plane. But yeah, it's kind of what you believe in yourself, I guess. And it's interesting how you say like the sort of that science can't answer everything, and like philosophy sort of fills in some of those or maybe more uncertain facts. It helps us to discuss, to critique, to rationalise things.
Yeah, I think there are certain things that maybe philosophy can offer that science can't. And also certain things that trying to rationalise things is not going to help with. So where maybe analytical philosophy can't help either. And that maybe can be got at through art or certain
music.
Other things. Yeah, music. And again, it depends. This is subjective, what I'm saying. This is just my thoughts about things. But like, I feel like there are things you can get from music, for example, that you can't get from any kind of rationality or reasoning.
Yeah.
And whether that's a truth that you can get from music, I don't know. But it's like a feeling or a kind of understanding, definitely.
Yeah. So like, does it matter if it's true if you get that feeling of, like, not really a word for it, but that sort of feeling you get when you listen to a piece of music, and if you've had the feeling, you know the feeling. And there's it's true per se, in quotation marks. It's something you feel, and it's that sort of rush of not content, but like you feel very calm or very energized or excited, or it's like a pleasure feeling, isn't it? When you hear something that you...
It's like almost like clarity.
Yeah.
Because like I think that, again, using music as an example, like there are things that music can reveal about how we as people experience the world, or how I as an individual experience the world. Like it, in a way it teaches me something, if that's what you're saying that science does, or that's what philosophy does. Like music can do that as well, and reveal certain things that aren't expressible through arguments.
Yes. Yeah. I think one thing I feel like is very beautiful about music is that you get that, lyrics especially. It's one of the only places where I've heard somebody say something or heard somebody's experiences and thought, I can't believe somebody else has managed to put that into words, but that is exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
And you think, I'm not actually alone in this. Like, I also feel somebody gets it. And that person, because you don't know them, say it's like, obviously like a famous singer or whatever, just that thing of somebody miles away who doesn't even know who I am and whatever, just gets me. And they just get that feeling. And I feel like music is one of the only places that I've really felt that in a personal way, where I don't have to speak to anyone about it. It's just that mutual understanding. Yeah,
and that kind of feeling of connectedness, which I think is just really important to feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Or to feel okay about not feeling okay, or any of that kind of thing. I think, music and, other art forms or forms of communication or various things capture in a way that, I'm just sort of using rationality as a vague throwaway term to try and capture science and philosophy or whatever, but that rationality can't really capture, because I think in some ways, again, using rationality in that kind of way, it can alienate us from ourselves, and move the focus away from the human experience or our feelings, which are such an important part of the world, because they are how we experience the world, and how we experience the world is all that is real to us, realistically. So trying to ascend too high into the plane of objectivity and that kind of thing misses a lot.
Not everything can be articulated.
Yes.
It's like when you have those inexplainable feelings like we were talking about earlier, and you just can't, you can't describe it. It's just somebody has to kind of felt the same.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of links to like one of the things I've written down is that by communicating with other people, and be that obviously impersonally, as I say, music or like art or dance or anything like that, focusing on philosophy itself, do you think there's a healing aspect of philosophy, either looking at theories on your own or mainly by discussing things with people?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely there, as in philosophy can have that kind of healing aspect. Like I think for me, like I said, I was drawn to philosophy because I think a lot. I am an overthinker and have been at times prone to existential angst, or like, what is the meaning of life? Typical teenager stuff. Teenager me applying for uni and was like, I'm going to study philosophy because I think too much about life's meaning, that kind of stuff. And in a way, philosophy can potentially encourage that, which is not always healthy, but equally it can provide you a way of putting an endpoint on the questions, or finding an answer that you're happy with, which doesn't, well, as we were discussing earlier, there isn't necessarily one answer, but if you sort of use it as a way of, rather than being overwhelmed with the fact that there isn't any answers or there isn't one answer, you find something that you feel like is an answer that works for you. So again, talking about the functional role of truth as a kind of what works, finding an answer that feels like it makes life a bit more satisfying in a way, and at risk of sounding like a self-help book, I think, which I feel like, unrelated, not for this, but just thinking about my Nietzsche essay that I wrote in my finals paper, my last exam, last question, where I was like, I don't think I'm writing philosophy anymore. I think I'm just writing Nietzsche's guide to how to make life beautiful, which is maybe not what they're after, but yeah. How was I going with that? At risk of sounding like a self-help book.
Yeah.
You know, you can find answers to existential questions or other questions. Not all philosophy is existential. Quite a lot of it isn't. But yeah, you can find answers that give life meaning for you, or a way of being happy with life's lack of meaning. And I think that's can be really helpful. And I think it can also be helpful in discussing values and what you value, and discussing what value is. But it can help with that a lot, I think. You know, some people might not like questioning values or what value is, because it might shake their values that they hold in a way that is unhelpful. But then for some people who maybe feel like lost or unhappy with the world or whatever, they can find explanations through that.
Yeah. There's that space for discovery. Maybe growth if you're maybe, I don't know, maybe you need to realise something.
Yeah. Like, I think it gives you the kind of tools to ask the questions and find an answer. Again being, I think a lot of what I found so frustrating with philosophy was the lack of answer. And I'm like, but there's so many that could also be, I mean, the argument works for that one, the argument works for that one. Okay.
There's too many options.
Yeah, but actually it's okay to be like, I don't know, but this is one way of thinking about it, and that works. So, yeah.
That's very interesting, yeah. So I almost feel like maybe, I guess linking that with philosophy, it's like when you look at it on your own, it's you're very much in your own little cooking pot, right?
Yeah.
But like when you're talking to people and discussing a particular topic, maybe who have a similar view, or you're just discussing it in general and somebody else presents a slightly different view, it almost removes that maybe loneliness that surrounds it.
Yeah.
Because you have that sort of very solitary like introspection potentially if it's that sort of within philosophy. But if somebody else presents their own ideas, or you're discussing it, and there's that idea of communication obviously with somebody else, and then I don't know, getting something out, it helps you to rationalise it to a level. Maybe.
Yeah. Doing philosophy on your own, you can fall down a bit of a rabbit hole, or end up feeling quite disillusioned, or have shaken your foundations of reality or whatever. But I think I've definitely, when I've found myself enjoying philosophy the most, is when I'm able to have conversations about it with people. That's when I'm like, this is fun, this is interesting. Like you were saying, you've got like that connectedness of having a conversation with someone, so you can't feel that alienated from the world whilst bouncing ideas. And I think saying it out loud, again, like you were saying, you can't sort of words, and it doesn't have that much power, because it's just one way of talking about it,
Yeah.
or not one way of talking about it, but
One way of perceiving things.
yeah. And so I think it's not quite as crushing or overwhelming.
Yeah. It takes you out of it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It takes you out of it. It makes it more manageable. Is it, again, connectedness, but also just the fact that it's out loud and therefore situated in the world rather than just in your head. Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It situates it in the world, so it grounds it. Whereas if you're just thinking, that's just sort of...
Thoughts are endless, right? Whereas when you've said a sentence, that's it. The thoughts out there. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, and you can see it in the context of the world around you, and so it doesn't hold maybe as much weight.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah.
Nice. This is me like visualising words floating around my head because I'm a visual learner. But no. So the last like few, I've got loads of questions, guys. I really went off on this. I guess we've kind of covered this in a sense, but we haven't really talked that much about psychology, which is your preferred, maybe.
Yeah.
Would say it's like to reality potentially, and then also to make it a bit lighter, just why do you love it?
Okay. I think it definitely feels more applicable to reality. And like I have mentioned, there are a lot of ways that philosophy can be applicable to reality. But in psychology, it's talking about, very real world stuff. Not all of psychology. I also say this as someone who's mostly done quite practical, like applications side of psychology. So looking at like education and learning, or clinical psychology and sort of interventions and that kind of thing. So that's very real world based. And there is more abstract psychology that's out there and stuff. So this is, again, just speaking from my sort of, and why I like it as well. I really like how real world it is. Just because it feels important to me. And it feels like something I can make a difference with in a positive way. Because I like trying to understand people, and I also, want to be able to help people. So I'm like, that's so good.
Nice. Right. Question then is, you've kind of been sort of. Are you glad to have studied psychology and philosophy as a joint degree?
Yeah.
And what have the subjects taught you beyond to an exam?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I am glad I studied psychology and philosophy. Definitely glad I studied psychology. But then I do think there are a lot of things I got out of philosophy and that I'm glad I got out of it. Like, while I found it very frustrating at times and also just harder. So I think I am glad I did it as a combination, because I think doing a joint degree, although it's hard when faculties don't communicate, and lots of people say doing a joint degree, you're like doing like 1.5 degrees. And I think in some ways, but also I think I got off quite lightly compared to some other degrees in terms of workload. Oh, poor Lily, crying. I think, what was the question? What if I was just doing the same thing the whole time?
Yes.
And I think there was enough variation in the type of work that I was doing that it kept me sort of, I could flip between different things depending on what mood I was in, or that kind of thing.
That's really interesting. I never thought about a joint degree like that.
Yeah, like,
but of course,
that was sort of,
it gives you that.
That was one of my, when I applied for maths and philosophy, I was like, oh, I like maths. Turns out I didn't when I got to uni. Turns out I just found it fun at school. But anyway, an aside. But I was like, oh, I like maths, but I think I'll go mad if I'm just doing maths the whole time. Like, I want to do some stuff that's a bit more like reading and discussion and that kind of thing. So like different ways of working. But yeah, like, I think it's been nice being able to, you know, sometimes I can do some stats, or sometimes I can go and romanticize my life and read an old philosophy book in an old library to try and motivate myself to study. Or like, you know, doing research, and so like working on my research project or that kind of stuff. It's all very different ways of working, and it gives variety is the spice of life and all that jazz.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what have I got out of it? Beyond being able to pass an exam.
Beyond an exam, yeah. Because that's what education should be about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think I've got, you know, the ability to chat shit in a podcast.
Slow.
Which I think I've done.
You're very articulate.
I think I've learnt how to bullshit. I think that's one of the main things that uni has taught me, particularly in philosophy, is how to bullshit.
Nice.
Particularly about something I don't really understand, because I don't really understand philosophy at all. So I think I've learnt how to...
You're very convincing.
Yeah, that's what I think I've learnt how to bullshit, and how to say something confidently without knowing what I'm actually going on about. Which, you know, is a useful skill to have.
It's a very useful skill. Yeah.
One I need to maybe keep under check, because...
Communication skills.
Yay, communication. So I think I've got that out of it. What else have I got? I think I've learned how to read. How to read philosophy. Yeah. I mean, I still find it really hard, but I think realising that you do need to sort of digest it a bit and kind of reread stuff. I mean, one of my tutors said to me at one point when I was just trying to sort of go, oh, I don't understand the topic at all, I just think I'm not cut out for this. He was like, no, that's kind of what philosophy is. Like, if you're not reading the same passage 5 times over, you're doing it wrong. I was like, oh, okay. So I guess I've learned how to read in that kind of way, how to read difficult stuff, and that's not always something I want to do, and I'm quite looking forward to reading lots of nice, light, easy stuff now that I'm no longer working towards exams. But, you know, sometimes it's fun to read challenging stuff that makes you think deeply about stuff, and I think I've learned kind of the skills to be able to approach that.
Yeah.
I think I've learned how to... This is kind of similar to bullshitting, but it's not always bullshit, but how to present an argument in a way.
Absolutely.
And then I think I've got an interest for psychology out of it. Like, I hate the word passion because it just sounds so
like an enlivened
cliche.
interest.
Yeah, like I really care about it, and that's really nice.
Both incomplete in a sense. Philosophy obviously very open-ended, and in psychology there's still, you know, a lot of questions about say more abstract things like consciousness. Opinion. What do you think are like the biggest or maybe like the most areas where the two could kind of coalesce to answer?
I think, again, I'm going to caveat this by being, well, this is just driven by my own interests and etc. etc. But for me, I think they work really well together in the kind of discussion about consciousness, as you were saying, because it's very much a thing that we do not understand, either from a philosophical level or from a scientific level. It's just a bit of a mystery, isn't it? And I think philosophy can definitely inform how we approach the study of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then also like psychology, neuroscience, that kind of thing can provide some kind of... Well, it provides like a lot of the sort of more modern consciousness stuff. Well, going back to your quote, this is where I'm going to get Descartes in. There's... Descartes was around a while ago. I can't remember the exact time, but it was several hundred years ago.
French guy.
Yeah, he was a French guy. Maybe 1600s, maybe the 1500s. At some point. Anyway,
I should know, but yeah.
It was before neuroscience, anyway. So
pre-Broca.
Yeah, pre-Broca. And there's a lot more that people have discovered about I think, well, people have used science to enhance philosophical arguments since then. For example, arguments against dualism. So, going back to our friend Daddy Descartes, I need to stop calling him that. Going back to our friend Descartes, you can keep that in if you want to, it's up to you.
I'm very happy to.
He was a dualist, which he thought mind and body were separate entities. And now this is still, big debate. Neuroscience has not off the bat ruled out dualism. But physicalism, taken as the kind of opposite of dualism, in that there is just physical matter. And so the mind, whatever that is physical. Still has some kind of problems with it, in the sense that the main kind of thing that people view as a problem for physicalism is subjective consciousness.
Yes.
Well, consciousness, and especially subjective consciousness, and the kind of how it feels, sort of nature of consciousness, and just the fact that it isn't really capturable by neuroscience. And so this is sort of where the big question is what is going on here? And so philosophy can inform psychology through the kind of, okay, just to use an example, but like a sort of, not, most people don't take this stance, but the theory like illusionism and saying that phenomenal consciousness, so the kind of subjective consciousness, is an illusion and that there's no such thing as it, but it's, Lily's reaction to that.
My terrified face.
Yeah. You see what I mean about the shaking our fundamental...
Yeah, it's very interesting though. But
yes, if it is an illusion, what does that mean for how we study it? Because then the thing we're trying to study isn't actually there. And so actually worth studying the things that generate that illusion. Yeah, or what that illusion is.
Yeah, because consciousness is one of those funny things where it's like, consciousness is the very thing that allows us to think about consciousness.
Yeah.
It's the very basic, it's the fundamental of all of our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the one thing that we just do not understand at all.
Yeah.
And it's almost that thing of like, if you have a big complicated machine and there's it goes wrong and you're looking at all the really complicated things and you haven't turned it on at the wall.
Yeah.
It's the basics that seem to be the most difficult to unpick.
It certainly seems like that, because it's like, this is such a, consciousness is our experience of the world. Like, it's such a fundamental thing that is stumped people.
We're stumped.
Yeah. Because was this the were we having a conversation about AI the other day?
I think so.
And if AI can be conscious?
Yes, if AI can be conscious, yes, yeah.
And a lot of people would be like, well, obviously it can't, because, it's not, you can't program
it's a programmable thing, yeah.
Yeah, but then actually what
it's
if...
not a programmable
but what
thing,
if,
rather.
Yeah, but then what if that's all consciousness actually is? Because we don't really know what
it's
consciousness is.
It's a biological program?
Yeah.
Or an electrical program? Because that's the thing, we don't know what consciousness is, so how can we tell whether an AI is conscious or not? Because ultimately, we don't know what that even means.
Yeah.
Because I suppose by AI conscious, people think of the whole, like, dystopian, it's sentient, it has its own sort
autonomy?
of autonomy. Yeah, it's like an autonomous being. But
then that goes into the whole free will debate, which I have not actually looked at in detail at all, but like, we're assuming that we're different from computers because we're free, or we're autonomous or sentient or whatever. But what if...
Are we really?
Yeah, what if we're just all a biological program of inputs and outputs and functions in between? But I don't know. And also, does it matter? Well, yes, it does matter. Obviously, AI has some very obvious free will obviously has real-world applications in terms of sort of law and punishment and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Again, I don't really know all the kind of issues with that, but it has applications.
Yeah.
But I think thinking about it too much and deeping whether we are just a collection of inputs and outputs, can lead people to have existential dread and despair. And you know what? If free will is an illusion, it's a nice illusion to have.
Yeah.
And
honestly,
makes our lives nice.
Yeah.
So keep it.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't shake your illusions too much.
Yeah, because I don't know, it's one of those things like I always think about it in the way of, so I'm not a religious person, so that aspect of it doesn't come in the idea of like mind body sort of dualism and stuff, but I always think of it in a way of like, maybe if free will is an illusion, if I'm a puppet, I don't have free will per se, or we don't know what this is, if I'm being programmed by something, ultimately on a real world or say surface level, if you want to talk about it in like degrees, I feel as if I'm making my own decisions, or my decisions are influenced by the experiences around me or people around me, or the, say, what goes on directly in the day. Other people feel the same in that they make their own decisions. Obviously there are occasions when people can't make their own decisions or are not, but my point is that generally if we feel as individuals that we have control over the different aspects of our lives to whichever degree, is that not the most important thing?
Yeah. Because
we all feel we have free will, or if you have the feeling of free will and you are satisfied in that and you don't think too much about it, you keep it very much like, you know what, I'm going to go get my coffee this morning from my favourite cafe. There's a point to which thinking too much about it becomes debilitating.
Yeah, definitely.
And conversation is intriguing. It's stimulating, but it can also go too far.
Yeah.
And if I can keep doing what I want to do, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Like, I think philosophy can be fun to, this isn't to undermine philosophy by saying play with it, but philosophy can be fun to, play with the ideas, to sort of toy with the ideas or consider them, but also to be able to come back to the real world, with the real world being how we experience it. And if we experience it like that, that's what we come back to.
Yeah.
And otherwise, how do you function, really, if you don't use these assumptions or illusions or whatever? They're there for a reason.
Yeah, precisely. The world is as the world is.
The world is as the world is.
Right. I think after... This is probably going to be my longest episode so far.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's good. We like this.
I can yap for days.
People will like it. You've been a very good guest.
Oh, cheers.
And we should do it again.
We will do it again.
But thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. I'm also glad you brought it back to the quote, because I made a mental note. I need to mention the quote at some point, because I always do that in the episodes, and I didn't. And then you brought up the quote, and I was like, oh, thank God.
Well, I was like, Descartes quote, but then I realised the thing I was trying to say was about dualism, which isn't really to do with I think, therefore I am. Because the I think, therefore I am is about scepticism. But anyway.
We got the guy in, it's fine. You mentioned the quote, so that's okay.
I don't think, therefore I'm not.
Yeah, precisely.
My favourite philosophy meme. To turn philosophy into a joke, Yeah. My favourite was I think, therefore I cannot sleep.
I like that one. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Do you want to say goodbye?
Bye. Thanks for listening to me yap.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Wren, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It was very fun. It was very fun. And yeah, like I say, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, I'll be back.
But yeah, and thank you all so much. I will speak to you again in the next one, which is next week. Take care and let's keep talking.